thing. Chakra 2, water and sexuality. Once an organism has secured its survival, its next turns to pleasure and sexuality. Chakra 2, associated with the element water, represents the urge toward pleasure, the expansion of one's world through sensate exploration, the realm of emotions, and the play of opposites that occur through sexuality. The beginning of the second chakra cultural stage was marked by the climactic change that occurred at the end of the Great Ice Age. This global springtime coincided with the beginnings of agriculture, the beginnings of seafaring, and the eventual development of irrigation technology, all aspects of the water element. Astrologically, it was the dawning of the age of Cancer, a cardinal water sign. The underlying theme of fertility, dominant in the Neolithic era, also fits with the watery aspect of procreation, and through its 7,000 years of stability, population estimates reveal a growth from 5 million to 100 million. This marked increase brought its own challenges, further stimulating the growth of consciousness and culture. The development of agriculture eased some of the demands of survival, enabling larger populations to be supported with relative stability. Stop. Stop it. Go. Population estimates reveal a growth from 5 million to 100 million. This marked increase brought its own challenges, further stimulating the growth of consciousness and culture. The development of agriculture eased some of the demands of survival, enabling large populations to be supported with relative stability. This created an enormous flowering of culture in terms of art, religion, trade, architecture, and early forms of writing. Because the archetype of the Great Mother was still predominant principle during the Neolithic period, this stage is still characterized by the static feminine, though new elements were beginning to stir. When fertility is worshipped, so is birth. With children come the growth of both male and females, and inevitably the worship of both genders. In the Great Mother mythology, there gradually emerged a mythical counterpart, son/lover. As the archetype gained prominence, the inequalities in the mythical status between the sexes as mother and child would have become increasingly apparent. The role of the male, given a sacred honor as hunter in the Paleolithic, would have been much reduced in an agricultural society whose emphasis is upon fertility. Much conjecture has been made about gender politics during this era and its ensuing downfall. Whether it was a balanced partnership society, as suggested by Ray Eilzer, or a golden age of matriarchy, as suggested by some wistful feminists, archaeological research shows a general absence of fortifications or implements of war, instead of revealing a peaceful, prosperous, and deeply religious growth of communities. However, inequalities cannot remain stable indefinitely, and whether by violent invasions from invading patriarchal tribes from the northern steppes, as suggested by Mariha Gimbutas, or by gradual transformation of the culture from within, the mythical son/lover and the Great Mother as ruling principles of nature were brutally overthrown by a warrior father god, leading us to the eventual replacement of the goddess cultures by a ruling aggressive patriarchy. This violent and tumultuous change ushered in the beginning of our current era, the dawning of the third chakra. Chakra 3, fire and will. Chakra 3 is related to the element fire and marks the emergence of power that arises when consciousness awakens to individual autonomy and the development of personal will. Free will is a relatively new element that has not only recently been introduced into the evolutionary mix. No other animals have fire, and none can transform themselves and their environment to the degree that humans can. Free will allows us to break away from passive habits dictated by the past and create a new direction. Free will is essential for breaking new ground, for the innovation that is the precursor to all change, and hence cultural evolution itself. In child development, this stage is marked by the beginnings of impulse control. As the child learns to curtail his or her instinctual urges in favor of a more socially acceptable behavior. This mastery also awakens the potential for individual autonomy and the simultaneous need to determine one's own reality, which takes place, albeit clumsily, during the willful stage of the terrible twos. Threes are pretty horrendous too. In my experience, threes become the 3-year-olds become so much more conscious than the 2-year-olds. In a culture, this stage is marked by a civilization that is less deeply bound to the cycles of nature, but has expanded through progressively more complex technology beyond the limitations that nature imposes. It is unclear during the Neolithic how much individuals had a sense of their own autonomy outside the mandates of the community. Anyone who has lived the life of a farmer knows how it binds one to the cycles and whims of nature. My conjecture is that increased technological capability allows the possibility of divergence from nature, which, in turn, awakened the potential for free will. Unfortunately, some individuals or tribes would have come to this realization before others, allowing them to use their newfound will to control and dominate others who were weaker or who had not yet awakened their own will. Over the next several millennia, rising masculine forces pushed against the dominant numinosity of the mother goddess and spawned an aggressive period of civilization that has continued into the present day. The force it must have taken to supplement the fundamental religious symbols that existed since the beginning of conscious time must have been considerable indeed. What could possibly equal the miraculous life-giving powers of the goddess? Death is the only power equal in strength to the ability to create life. Thus, the fear of death became a prime motivator of culture and behavior. The miracle of birth, which could only emerge from the feminine, became instead the willed creation of the masculine god. Thus, the future emerged from the head, not the body, from fear rather than trust. The masculine archetype, in order to gain ascendance, was forced to prove an equivalent power through constant demonstrations of domination, war, and heroic activity. The change from the peaceful goddess cultures of the Neolithic to the aggressive sun-worshipping culture began the invasions of the horse herders who descended from the northern steppes around 4300 BCE. Over a series of invasions and subsequent insurrections through the next 3,000 years. This era was firmly established by the Iron Age, and the goddess cultures had been sent to the underworld of lost civilizations to be replaced by an era typified by power, domination, and war. The Iron Age coincides with the astrological age of Aries, a cardinal fire sign, fire being the element of the third chakra. This change was made possible by the use of fire to forge metals, from which tools and weapons of war were made. Metal tools offered advantages in the struggle for survival, superiority over others, and a further stimulation of strategic thinking. The ability to do more with less enabled increased production that required greater coordination and governing by theoretic power structures, such as how to store and distribute grain, trade goods, or manage water resources. Weapons enabled the domination of one culture over another. The third chakra heralds the birth of individualism. Yes, I see you. Whose mythic theme was the hero's quest, the goal of which was to slay the dragons of the old ways, overthrow the consciousness of the past, the unconsciousness of the past, and find one's individual power. This awakening of individualism occurred through heroic acts, the transcendent freedom brought by technology and use of aggression as basic mode of survival. Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, is a pivotal mythic figure of this age. The most important thing to understand about this chakra and its corresponding age is that, for better or worse, it is generally achieved through initial rejection of the values associated with the previous two levels. Fat boy, relax. Stop. Earth and water. Indeed, fire cannot burn if there is too much of either element. This denial of our underlying foundation is not a healthy way to grow. It reflects an immature initial attempt to reroute the collective consciousness into a new direction from the passive, habitual tendencies of the lower chakras. To the emerging patriarchal system, this meant a rejection and outright domination of the primary values of the previous Neolithical culture, which were the values of the first two chakras: the sacredness of the earth, sexuality, emotion, women, community, and cooperation, essentially flipping all of these values into their opposites. Thus, the peaceful earth goddess were replaced by thunderous sky gods. The miracle of birth was supplemented by the fear of death. The sacredness of sexuality repressed, and cooperative partnership was replaced by hierarchical control. With this change, the basic order of life, as it had been known since the dawn of human consciousness, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of years, was broken. In Hindu mythology, this can be likened to the ascensionist approach exemplified in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, whose aim is to attain liberation by separating consciousness from its embeddedness in matter. As in most patriarchal religions, the direction emphasized was up, favoring heaven and devaluing the earth. Indeed, this emphasis may have been necessary at the time to steer attention away from the mundane concerns in order to realize that there are other levels of reality. Opening up to another polarity in the cosmic dance expands our horizons and our choices. This polarity then allows the dynamic interplay of forces that is necessary to create power. The third chakra age is characterized by the dynamic masculine, whose symbol is a circle with an arrow, the symbol we use for both the male and for the planet Mars, which represents aggressive energy. The arrow pushes away in linear fashion from the static circularity of the feminine in order to chart a new direction. Before the new direction can be established, however, the habits and customs of the old, which have been ruling structures of the consciousness, are often destroyed. From the patriarchal domination of the Iron Age, through the rising scientific and industrial revolutions, 2 world wars, and countless other violent skirmishes to the current creation of spacecraft and computer technology, the third chakra characteristics of aggression, technology, and political power still haunt us today. Issues of power mount in today's current events. Use of the world's resources for our incessant demands of energy production are central ecological concerns. Issues of reclaiming our personal wills, which have been dominated by parents, schools, bosses, and governments, are central issues in the many 12-step groups that assuage the victims of our current dominant paradigm.